TT, the game has gone. Somber start to the weekend, but an understandable one given the situation with Gareth Bale testing himself by going to China possibly. And when you consider that in the context of clubs like Bolton and Bury struggling so badly at the moment, potential for them to go out of business before the season starts, it's understandable to kind of take stock a little bit and review, I guess, where the game is at. This isn't all going to be negative, but I think it's important to look at the way that the game's changed and look at it from your own perspective. So I have three kind of different perspectives on the game. Firstly, as a fan, I grew up in a time when there was very little football on television. I grew up in Guernsey where there was no professional football, so I couldn't get to live matches very often. And so when I got the opportunity to watch football on television, whether that was me wearing out my videotapes, watching reruns of Sports Night from the 20-minute section of Sports Night that was dedicated to football, or the big match when live matches started to be televised in the 80s, or when I was able to go and watch a game with my dad when we were on holiday in the UK. I had that lack of content, that it was like gold dust for me to be able to watch football in that way, and I lapped it up. I was amazed. I was in wonder at the spectacle that I watched. Honestly, it was a feeling that I wish I could have my children share and experience, but they don't, because the game now is available on demand 24/7. You can watch football from leagues all over the world anytime. You can watch coaches go to work on the training ground. You can watch documentaries on what's going on in the changing room, in the boardroom, in the gyms, in the sports science areas, in the analysis rooms, and we're just fat on football. It's everywhere, and has it peaked? It can't be too far off peaking, but the fact that we're all fat on football means that we all value football less. Certainly this generation values football less than it did, that my generation did. So from a fan's perspective, it's viewed as something that everyone owns a little bit more. It's not special to them. It's not like they're on the outside. They kind of feel like they're part of it. And in some ways that's good, but for me in general, it's a negative. It's a negative because the game should have defined roles. Fans should be fans, in my opinion. Players should be players. Coaches should be coaches. Administrators and directors should be directors and administrators. Unfortunately, everyone kind of has a fairly high level of knowledge imparted upon them. So if you watch Monday Night Football, you understand why Pep Guardiola plays the way he does. If you hear Klopp speak on a television program, you then understand the way that he manages and some of the kind of gold dust around the magic that he creates in the dressing room. And everyone with that knowledge then applies that in their own way, rightly or wrongly. And the fans aren't necessarily fans. They feel like they're part of it. They feel like they're entitled to have more of a say than they should have. And when you throw social media into the mix, you throw open communication into the mix, and perhaps a lack of respect for people, for other human beings, as I see far too much these days. It's a pretty toxic mix, and it creates behaviours and scenarios that I don't think are a good reflection for the game. From my second perspective, I look at it as a coach. So I think you can look at it two ways with coaches. It's a bit more balanced. The progression on television and the public consciousness of the game generally means that people have more information, and theoretically that should mean that coaches are better at their jobs. They understand their jobs better. They understand how all the detail fits together. They understand the processes that are required to coach, to gain knowledge in the game, to gain experience in the game. And that's all positive. It's all positive. If you're a student of the game, there's so much to consume, and you can become incredibly knowledgeable quite easily at a fairly low cost. What I find frustrating about the state of the game today as a coach is that everyone has an opinion, and rather than actually concentrate on coaching, most coaches have to deal with agendas off the field. and usually centred around people's opinions. That can be players, can be fans, can be directors, it can be the media, and usually it's a mix of all of them. When you sign a player these days, let's say at an amateur level or a non-league level, the coach has to convince that player that he has knowledge, or he or she has knowledge, that they can deliver sessions, that they have a philosophy, that they understand sports science processes, because the players have a level of expectation way beyond, a much more detailed level of expectation than a player did when they signed in similar circumstances 20 or 30 years ago. So having to convince the players in the first place is a challenge. Is that a good or a bad thing? I don't think it's either, to be honest. It can be a very good thing, because it pushes coaches to be better. But if the focus from the players is on judging the coach's performance too much, they forget about their own performance, and that's where the balance gets a bit out of whack. And on top of that, as I say, you have to convince the media, you have to convince the fans repeatedly. I think it's such an unhealthy process for fans to be having a greater bearing on the future of a coach, and their fortunes than they used to have. Understandable if the results are poor, understandable if the football's poor, but everyone lives in a microwave society now. Everyone wants success immediately, and no one is patient. And development processes with individual players, with units and with teams take time and patience and good and bad experiences before you reach a level of performance that you as a coach would be satisfied with. And you should be given the right to have the time to do that, and the patience from stakeholders. And sadly, fans are stakeholders now. Similarly, directors, and the times when a chairman would walk into a dressing room, and I've had it as a player certainly, where chairman walked into the dressing room and gave their perspective, let's call it, in front of the manager and the players, and then walked out of the dressing room if things were good or bad. That we used to kind of take that with a pinch of salt. But these days, the people in those positions are much more educated. They actually understand the processes much more. They understand the game much more. They might not be able to apply it particularly sensibly, but they understand the detail, and that knowledge again can be a dangerous thing. And for me, the negative as a coach about the game today, and the context of the television and the information we're talking about, the culture that football represents now, you shouldn't be spending all your time convincing other people off the pitch. You should be convincing people with your performances on the training ground and with your team's performances on a Saturday afternoon. So that's not healthy. It's definitely not healthy for the game. And I think that as a coach, I could see the game losing great coaches because of it, and that is not a healthy situation. And then the third perspective is that of a father, and that's the most important one, of course. I am not sure that football is the most healthy pursuit for me to expose my kids to. It's done. I'm a football man. It's in my blood. My lot in life was secured many years ago. It was made. My pathway was always going to be affected by football, and I'm very glad it has been. But I'm not sure I want to make that make football a given for my kids, because there are far too many unhealthy behaviours that come out of it. And there's probably other pursuits and other sports that might make them more rounded human beings. It's just fact. Sorry, it's not fact. It's opinion. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, particularly when it comes to their own children. And I am not convinced that I would be doing the right thing if I only expose them to football. I can guarantee you I will not be only exposing them to football. However, by the same token, it's part of my life, and it will be part of theirs to some extent. So how I go about doing that is something I give a lot of thought to, and I would urge all parents to do that. Don't just go down that road because your natural compass says you're a football man, you're a football woman, so that's what you want your kids to do. There are other very healthy pursuits to be following as well, certainly to complement, if not to replace, football. I don't feel bad saying that. I don't feel like I'm betraying my love for the game. It's just the most important thing to me, and I need to think about that seriously. And the reflection and the comparison is an interesting one. All that said, I love this game, in the words of Patrice Evra. I absolutely love this game. I've experienced so many wonderful, wonderful moments in the game. I've learned so much from it. My life has been enriched by it, and I want that to continue. So, with all that said, of course the game is not what it was 20 or 30 years ago, but there are moments of beauty. There are moments that sit comfortably with me in terms of behaviours, in terms of learning opportunities and experiences. There are sections of the game where I think it's a very wholesome and healthy activity to be involved in. And then there are areas of the game that I don't think are that healthy. And as with everything, you have your own free will in life. You choose to be involved in football. Well, find the areas of the game that you love, and don't moan about all the stuff that you can't control, because this is the same conversation as you would have with your players. So I'm not going to start moaning about the television companies. The television rights and so on and so forth are not something I can affect. I'm going to find the areas that I think are wholesome, valuable, worthwhile being involved in, where I can make a difference, hopefully in a way that reflects the values that I hold dear. And as I say, most importantly, I will try and encourage my kids to find the life lessons in football, and the wholesome life lessons in football, and try and avoid the behaviours, or at least use the behaviours that they see that aren't so good as examples not to follow. Finally, on the television and the economics of the game, I don't think we're that far off a tipping point. I think the prevalence of streaming now, and the fact that most media companies are now starting to toy and play with their product, chop it up a little bit, provide more on-demand services. There's more competition out there, frankly, and streaming services will help to reduce the reliance on these premium subscription scenarios that you perhaps had with Sky 5-10 years ago. But I don't think we've reached the top yet either. And sadly, the gap between the rich and the poor is going to continue to grow. How many clubs does it take to go out of business before people start to change things from a regulation or a political point of view? Many, many more. Football is like some other high-profile sports, like politics. It's run by money, by people with influence and money and power, and their interests are not always wholesome. Their interests are often generated from gains that they can make personally from the game. If you don't believe that, then you're not living in the real world. I can't affect that. What I can affect is the people around me, the players that I coach, the friends and the acquaintances that I have in the game, my own children, and that's what I'm going to focus on. In time, market economics will give rise to some balancing, and I think we'll go over the top, and the game will have to redress the balance a little bit. We'll have to review the amount of money the players get paid, because there will come a time when that growth is not sustainable, and it will probably start to regress a little bit. I'd love to see a wage cap type scenario. That's where sport starts to become sport again on a more balanced playing field. But I'm not living in the real world if I think football's going to go that way anytime soon. So I'm just going to continue to try and affect the game the way that I can, and the way that I think that makes me happy as well, because I'm going to continue to derive a lot of pleasure and enjoyment from the game, and I'm going to try and stay away from the unhealthy side of the game as much as possible. So I hope that you can find positives in the game. I hope that you can continue your love affair with the game in the same way that I have, and experience amazing positive experiences in the game. And I hope that you don't get bogged down by a load of the negativity and the shit that goes on in the game, because to be honest, life's too short. Have a great weekend, everyone.